Welcome back to Building a Fighter. My name is Dr. Austin Shane, sports chiropractor in Scottsdale, Arizona, also a wrestling coach. With me, as always, badass strength coach in Denver, Colorado, Alex Friedman, also a wrestling coach. And that matters for the topic we're talking about today. So we're talking about how do you plan a practice and plan a season smarter, not harder. And what we would consider is mostly what's called an ecological approach to planning a practice or ecological approach to planning a practice. So Alex, give us a broad overview of what we're kind of talking about here.
Yeah. So what we want to do is we want to structure a practice that's most, ecologic or efficient for our athletes to both learn, have a succinct kind of workout and utilize energy systems in the best way possible, but then also get the most out of each day, into each week, into each month, into each, year in their own progression and process. Right. So it's how do we find a better way to do practice than just like the typical do a technique, practice that technique, roll live, and practice, or do sprints and practice, right? So we're trying to get out of this
sprints with quotes,
right? Out of this like dogma of this is how you run a practice, and we can change that via so many different variables, different approaches. And one of the things that we really want to hit on is we want to go through a lot of these like pedagogical vocabulary terms, really, like, which pedagogy is just the process of learning. Yep. Right. So how can we hit this and optimize it within our practices along the route of making our program robust to any athlete that walks into the door? So we really want to optimize this practice session so that we have a system that makes everybody better.
Right. And kind of what I want to get across is like starting from small, the micro level, which is just planning a drill, to planning a practice, to planning a month, to planning an entire season, right? Or planning an entire year. And so what goes into when I think about planning a drill, right? We can break it down to what is there's variables at play. All these different variables come together to create a drill. Well, a variable in and of itself is anything that can impact the end result of what's going on. It's what goes into all the different pieces that go into the end result. Those are variables. And how I break down my drills and how I create drills for my athletes are, I will break down a position using a decision tree. So say a good example is like a breakdown, right? Or just riding on top, for example. If I look at all of the different positions in wrestling that go into riding on top, what are the variables that continually stand out in those things? And time again, like this is from Angel Cejudo. He's asked all of the best top wrestlers he knows. Time and time again, one of the key factors is putting weight on the hands. Whether you're spiral riding, whether you're leg riding, whether you're chopping, whether you're doing literally anything that you want to do, whether you're just trying to bump an elbow forward to put weight forward and to stop their movement, a lot of this movement comes from putting weight on the hands. So that is a variable that I would circle in big old gold circle, that is a key point. All right, I found my key point. That is my main variable. Now, how do I get this athlete to not just tell them put the weight on the hands, to understand for themselves that that is the main goal that's happening? Because we know through basically every study ever done on motor learning and programming is that if that athlete can find out for themselves what the answer is, instead of me telling them what the answer is, they are going to understand it in the long term, not just in that one specific drill. They understand the concept, not just the movement, right? And that's majorly important as we progress into our career. So what I would do is say we're doing this drill, or we're developing this drill for a main variable of putting weight on the hands. Maybe I have them starting in a front headlock position, which is also just as important to put weight on the hands, right? Or I have them starting from behind. The only goal is to get them to break the opponent's base, right? I'm not telling them to put weight on the hands. I'm telling them that they need to break their opponent down from a quadruped to break one of the arms or legs out. they'll find out real quick on their own it's a lot easier to break a base at the arm than it is at the leg, right? The legs are a much stronger position. So they'll find on their own through this drill that the best way to break somebody down, the best way to control somebody on top, the best way to get to the next position is to put weight on those hands and to chop out one of the legs from the front, not the back. Well, that's important for me as a coach because it makes them realize on their own that that is a key variable. That is something that they can get better at as they progress forward. And it's going to translate not just in this drill, right? Because I don't care about them, this one drill of, oh, we got to break them down, right? I care that they can progress that into a wrestling match in and of itself. And if they understand the concept of that, they can apply that into the skills that they learn alongside the concept.
Yeah, I think 100%. And kind of the scenario that you've outlaid there, Austin, is doing two things. It's gamifying a drill a little bit, right? I'm not telling you chop this arm with your right arm into this position and follow this, right? Like time and place for the recipe and the cook, right? That's your middle school, that's your beginning level wrestler. That's,
Mm-hmm.
time and place for that for sure. But we're gamifying the drill. It's like, I don't care how you do it, break the base, right?
Exactly.
I'm giving you a goal to hit. And then I'm telling the partner, okay, make it a little bit hard for him, right? We're making this a little bit of like a cat and mouse. The second thing, and that's the gamification, right? Just make it a goal. Make athletes have fun with it. Give them this idea so they can intrinsically learn the variable, the principle themselves, right? The second thing that you're doing is you're giving them what's called a constraints led model, right? So I'm putting this constraint on you. You only score if you break the base, right? Like how you do that is up to you, but here's the rules of the game essentially, right? And we do this all the time in like strength and conditioning. We do this all the time in wrestling. It's like, okay, I want you to do this RDL, okay, but you're 10 inches, 6 inches from the wall, your butt has to hit the wall. There's your constraint. Butt has
Mm-hmm.
to hit the wall, right? So when we do this within a wrestling standpoint and we make these like small sided games or we make these short sided games, if you will, we're trying to instill principles. These principles or these variables that Austin's kind of highlighting or putting a gold star by are stuff that we should have identified through our experience of rolling or through our coaching ability to be, this is what we're going to base our system around, right? Like we have for my high school team and for the professional team, Factory X, we have our system of this is how we're going to approach a dagger type position. This is how we're going to approach riding on top. One of the key variables is putting weight in the hands. Now I can say that until I'm blue in the face,
Right.
right? I can tell my athletes this 1.5 million times, and it's like, fuck, why aren't they doing it? Why don't they get the concept? It's because I haven't put them in a situation, in a constraints led model to where they figure it out themselves. Oh, this shit does work, right? And so I think that's the challenge of creating meaningful drills, right? Is how can I, lead the horse to water without making it drink, right? How can I give you X, Y, and Z variable to focus on, or X variable at first, and then Y variable, and then stack them together in order to build upon? That's one way that I progress my drills, right?
Mm-hmm.
From getting this principle base or this variable base. Okay. Putting weight in the hands is a very important variable. Okay. Now let's look beyond that. What's the next most important variable? Okay. I got to break the hips somehow. I got to take a leg of the table out per se. Okay. I'll give you maybe some tools to do that. But now I have two kind of stimuli, two responses, right? I look at stacking these, right? And so my first stimulus is weight's not in the hands. Okay. Response, get weight in the hands. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Second stimulus, he's in a strong 4 point base or a quad pod. Okay. Next stimulus, break the hips. Okay. How do I do that? With a ankle lace, with a stubby ride, with a spiral, with a body lock, with transitioning to a double, right? All those are tools. All your athlete figures out those tools, but give them the second principle. There's two principles, layer them, figure out each one, right? And then we have multiple stimulus, multiple response. And that's where you get super advanced, is when you intermix, because at any MMA fight, there's 1 million stimuli, 1 million response to choose from.
Right.
But we can simplify this practice and give them those responses or those two things to kind of focus on as they progress in their skill set.
Exactly. And the better they get, or the more focused you want to get, the more constraints you'll give them, right? So another
Right.
example would be like, if I'm trying to teach somebody how to score on the corner of the mat and they need a 4-point move, right? They're down by 3 and they need that 4 in freestyle. This is another example. So say we can change the environment. One of the constraints can be the environment. I would shorten it up to where they have to stay in a much or smaller circle than the full mat, right? So that's one constraint that I'm going to do, where it's adding stress on top of the situation. They have to understand what's going on. We
Mm-hmm.
give them a situational constraint of, you can't just score to win. You have to score a certain way. I don't care what move you get there, but you have to expose the back, right? That's constraint number 2. And then I can give them a constraint number 3 of, maybe we're doing a freestyle position. Maybe we're in freestyle, right? There's a lot of underhook positions in freestyle and Greco. So I'm going to have them start in an underhook. So positional start constraint. Those are 3 different constraints. You know what that does? That focalizes the amount of variables that they can go after. That focalizes the pathways they can do, to where there's not a bunch of different things they can do. Maybe we went from 1,000 different capabilities down to 25.
Right.
They still have 25 different ways to figure it out, right? But that allows me to get them in, I guess, the more elite populations where they understand these situations, right? And this is a very high level drill, where you shouldn't be having like 6-year-olds doing this, but like, say, college wrestlers. This is a really good thing for a college wrestling room to implement, because you're getting a positional constraint, you're getting a situational constraint, and you're getting an environmental constraint to force them to understand a very, very, very powerful position in wrestling. How do you, if you're down 3 points, win a match in freestyle when you're on the corner and you have 30 seconds left? That happens to anybody that's ever wrestled freestyle. I've been there a lot, where I'm down by more than 1 score and I got to fucking finish. Well, we can apply that situation into a drilling format in a tactical setting, which we'll talk about our technical, tactical, and competition right after this. We're planning an entire week, right? But we can bring that element into our tactical training and allow them to get more out of that session, so they understand where these situations apply in a match. They understand what moves I should be doing in a match in order to get the desired response, which is our positive reinforcement of, oh, you won that go, right?
Right. No, absolutely. And I love the way you segued there for the technical, tactical, competitive type of practices, which is exactly where I was going to go. Like, let's say that this drill comes maybe like, I don't know, 45 minutes into practice, right? We're going to
Mm-hmm.
do this. This is our drilling segment, right? This segment on, like, say, a Wednesday, which is our tactical day, is going to look different on a Monday, which is our technical day, or,
Mm-hmm.
however you want to split it up, right? So on a technical day, I'm giving them the vocabulary and the tools to execute on the tactical day, right? So we're starting on the edge of mat in an underhook down 4. Okay. So on Monday, which is our technical day, I'm giving them the tools and the pathways. Here's how you score from an underhook. Here's the responses that you're looking for off the underhook. Here's your 4-point avenue. Here's, this is the trail that you follow when they give you this response, right? So I'm giving them the vocabulary in our technical day, okay, which is, I think, a really fun rabbit hole to go down to. And this is where a lot of coaches, I think, stick, right? Because this is like the what, right? And it's really interesting. Okay, what do I do here? This is the technique that you employ here. That's always interesting, right? So the what of the technique and the vocabulary of how you win that go, okay, is implemented in your technical days, which is a really fun place to layer in kind of different conditions or constraints there too. So a good example is I was at practice today and we were scoring from the dagger position, which our dagger position is just locked hands around the belly. Is that a pretty common term?
No.
Okay. Well, our dagger position is like I'm riding in folk style wrestling, but I lock my hands. It's like a body lock with their hands
Yeah,
on
it's
their
like a
back.
gut wrench position.
Quad pod. Yeah.
No.
So how do I score from there? Right. Some avenues I chain off into a double and wrestle it through. Okay. Other option, I run a spiral ride. Another option,
Throw a
I
boot in.
run to the hooks and get a stubby ride into my hooks on the back, right? And so I have those 3 avenues, right? Let's say we have those 3 avenues. Today, which was a technical day for us, we're going to practice and drill that and drill that and do a million reps and get a little bit of the repetitive practice in, right? And so a lot of the repetitive practice, I think, is valuable when we're implementing a new system or process,
Mm-hmm.
right? I get the feel for it. I drill it a million times. I can feel it out, and I see where I'm comfortable with it or where I lack with it, right? And I think that's a big thing that jujitsu guys like to avoid. They like to talk and theorize about the technique,
Right.
where
Yeah.
we should be drilling it and doing it a million times. It's like, you don't have a question about the technique. You need to do it 100 more times.
Yeah. If
So
you
that
haven't done the move 100 times, you don't have questions.
right.
Like, I don't care what you have to say. You don't have questions. You need to figure out what questions you have first.
Yeah, 100%. You got to figure out, does this not work, or am I just bad at it?
Yeah,
Those are
exactly.
two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the repetitive practice for me happens on the technical days, and it happens kind of far removed from competition, right? And we're going to get into our competitive seasons and this and that. But the rep scheme, right? The continuous type of learning is really important to implement on your technical days or when you're far away from competition.
100%. And so, like, layering into that, like, how I like to set up a week of practice.
Let's set
Say,
up a day of practice first. I don't
oh,
think
yeah, yeah, yeah,
we've
yeah,
got
let's
that.
do that. So, you and I differ on this.
Sure.
And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a differing opinion on this. I personally like to have explicit days where there is a technical day of practice, there is a tactical day of practice, and there is a competition day of practice. And I understand that that's not, for most high school wrestling teams, that is not applicable, right? Because you're not working with the elite of the elite kids for the most part to where they can benefit from that.
Right.
But I, the guys I work with do.
So,
and so how I lay it out is there are technical, tactical, and competition days, and they are mutually exclusive from each other. Instead of having to pair them all in
yeah.
to, there's a 30-minute technical session, there's a 20-minute tactical session, and then we go live for 20 minutes.
Well, I think we can draw a pretty strict parallel to like strength and conditioning from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're running more of a conjugate split where
100%.
you're at practice with this doing technically and tactically, which we know a conjugate split is effective for a higher trained
Yeah, for a
individual.
higher training age.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Which is the people that you're working with, right? I'm
exactly.
at a high school where 90% of my kids coming in have 1 year of wrestling, 1 or 2 years of wrestling experience, right? So I get a freshman with 2 years of wrestling experience that they're not ready for that conjugate style approach. So I run a little more of a concurrent program in my room where we do hit all the variables each day. We hit a little bit in the beginning. We hit almost a warm up or a refresher from the last day. I like to begin practice with a fast, actionable type of sequence, right? It's not necessarily new technique. I don't want to do new technique out the gate, right? And so then I do hit my technical, tactical, and competitive phases all in one day, more like a concurrent approach from the weight
Right.
room.
For sure. And so, and there's not, like Alex said, there's not one way that's better than the other. It's just situational, right? So if you're working in a high school room outside of like a prep school like Valiant, most of the time the concurrent system works really well. Guess what? The concurrent system also works really well for in the weight strength and conditioning room for most people that are not elite athletes. I would typically pick a concurrent model over a conjugate model, right? Moving forward, though, it is of my belief that after the first month of training in a college wrestling room, you should probably be, if you're in college wrestling, you should probably be on a conjugate style system,
I agree with that.
right? I think if you're wrestling in college and you've dedicated enough time and you're good enough to be on at any level, JUCO through D1 wrestling, I think you should probably be on a conjugate split because that's how you're going to maximize your overall training. That's how you're going to maximize your retention of knowledge. And that's how you're going to maximize your competitiveness or training and flexing that competitive muscle.
No, and I agree. I think with a conjugate type of model, one thing that we can rely upon, like from a learning standpoint, is it like a diverse approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this thing that goes on with learning a skill that's called the repetition or the forgetting hypothesis, right? And I learned it with like a back squat, right? If I'm doing 4 sets of 10 on a back squat, I'm done actively thinking about a back squat by like rep 4. I'm just going, right? Because I got a ton of work ahead of me. I'm just going to do it, right? I'm not going to think, am I technically executing this perfectly, right? In a concurrent model, practice looks the same every day. All right, these are our daily drills. We do them every day. I'm just going to go on autopilot, right? And now I'm not practically getting better. In a conjugate type of model, like Austin's saying, day starts off with a new stimulus, a different type of feel. So I have to solve that problem in front of me more chronically, AKA more activity in my brain, different attentional demands. I have to put more mental effort towards it. So
100%.
then I'm going to learn.
Yep.
Right.
It forces you to be focused on the task at hand.
Yeah.
And for college level athletes, high level athletes, if you're at an RTC, if you're at the OTC, that is going to be better for you from a motor learning, motor programming, and a knowledge standpoint, right? When we go into planning these different, I'll go into my way, and then I'll let you go into the concurrent way. But if I'm going in a conjugate system, and say it is a 5-day work week, right? It depends on what part of the season we're in, which we'll get onto later. But say we're in wrestling season, say we're 6 weeks out of competition, right? How I would layer in a typical week of practice and what it would look like in each day would be a Monday would be a technical day. I want to start on technique. I want them to start by flexing their brain, not necessarily flexing their brawn, right? Because I get them thinking about trying to learn new skills to start their week. That can be up to an hour and a half practice, but it is mentally taxing. So just like a competition day should probably only be about 45 minutes, right? 45 minutes to maybe an hour, but typically 45 minutes because you're only doing 3 to 6 matches and you need full breaks in between. Your technical day shouldn't be extremely long either. That's also a day that we can pair in our different stressors. Say if a technical day on the wrestling side is going to be low level, but we still need them to get some metabolic stimulus, that's a day we can pair our strength and conditioning work with them as well, right? And it all depends on what kind of model you're on. If you're a low, medium, high model, or if you're on a high, low model. If you're on a high, low model, then you'd want to pair your high intensity strength and conditioning on our competition day. If we're on a low, medium, high model, then we have a little bit more wiggle room where we can do a low intensity wrestling practice and a high intensity strength and conditioning practice and get that medium day that we're going after, right? So that's a little bit more advanced, but on a technical side of wrestling or MMA practice, because this applies to any martial art. We're talking about wrestling because that's our wheelhouse. This applies to any form of martial arts, right? Anything on the mixed martial arts spectrum.
Well, when I go into mine, I'll do it with MMA. So
okay. But it's focused on the technique and trying to fit in, I would say realistically, anywhere between 2 to 5 main concepts and hit them hard, right? 5 would be on the top end if you want to kind of go in not super far in depth and have them just drill, understand the concept and move on. But I would say 3 is our secret weapon right there. That's our magic number of 3. We're doing 60 minutes of training in each position, drill, or technique that we're going over is going to be a 20-minute block of training with about a 5-minute break in between, right? After that, we have our tactical day. So that's going to be our technical days I like on Monday. I also would like that on Thursday before our Friday competition day, right? Our tactical day. Remember, we're 6 weeks out. So we're going into where we have our workload relatively high. Tactical day number 1 is going to be on, I typically like it to be on that Tuesday because I like that low, medium, high model, right? So we're going to go, Tuesday is going to be our tactical day. That's going to be where the techniques, those 3 techniques that we just applied on Monday, now we're going to try to allow you to understand them in a higher paced or higher understanding position, right? So now that comes down to the coaches have to step up and they have to make really, really good drills or put really, really good situations together where the techniques we just did, now we have to use constraint-led approaches into drilling those situations and applying them at a higher intensity, anywhere between a 6 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10 intensity. That's where my sweet spot is, right? These days are typically the grinder days, unfortunately, because they're a little bit higher volume along with higher intensity. This is going to be anywhere between a 60 to 90 minute practice, and we're going to try to hit that pretty hard to where they get the understanding of what's going on. I like 30 minutes per tactical session. So again, not 3 tactical awareness techniques are going to be my sweet spot in the situation. You can go 2 to 5, right? And then and that's going to be my Tuesday. Then we have our competition day. That's going to be our, if we're in this phase that I'm talking about right now, we only need one competition day. That's going to be Friday, right? And that's going to be the end of the week. I really like to have that at the end of the week to where that's how we end, because that's how we end our weeks in competition, right? That's typically, we're not competing on a Tuesday. We're competing on a Saturday. So that allows us to prep for the end of the week. That's going to be anywhere between a 45-minute to 60-minute session where the only goal that this wrestler has is to win the match. And you're going to try to simulate that environment. I always recommend putting a singlet on. I always recommend having a coach be a ref. I always recommend taking full break in between. I don't remember what the USA Wrestling threshold is, but I think it's 12 minutes. It's either 12 or 15 minutes. But having the allotted amount of time within matches, just like at a tournament, right? All of those things apply on a competition day because you want that person stepping on the line at a 10 out of 10 so they can give their full effort every single time so that they can flex that competition muscle again. So again, I'll go over a week. My week is Monday would be technical. Tuesday would be and this is 6 weeks out. If we get closer, then we add in more technical, less tactical. But Monday, technical. Tuesday, tactical. Wednesday, I would go another tactical. So it would be 2 medium days in a row. Thursday would be technical. So I get a break before my red line day. Friday would be full on competition. We're going balls to the wall. If you want to vary those stimuli, you can switch your Monday and your Tuesday, where you could go tactical, technical, tactical, technical competition, right? That's all dependent on how your athletes respond because every team is different. But that's how I would layer out at 6 weeks out from major competition, a week of training along what I would consider our building a fighter model of planning a practice schedule.
Yeah, and no, I think that works really well, and gives you an opportunity to put a lot of work in a week, and then retain a lot of it. And then if we have a consistent theme in those technical and tactical days in a practice in a week and like a month cycle, what have you, which you should have a consistent kind of theme and practice there. Those themes and that performance will show up on your competition day. Regardless if it's just geared towards winning, you're going to see a lot of those same techniques that you're working get applied in the competition phase, which is what we want, right? We want our athletes to take their specialties and their superpowers, apply them with the techniques that we're practicing and learning, and then voila, we got a winning athlete, right?
Well, that's how you know you did a good job on your tactical days, right? That's how you know you did a good job on your constraint-led drilling and your constraint-led situational goes, because that what makes the click. That's what makes the light bulb go off for the athlete when they're in competition, and you don't have to tell them to do it. They do it on their own.
Yeah, they can identify the situation. And I love that. I think that's really important a really important concept to hammer home is we want to create independent athletes. We don't want to create dependent athletes, right? Dependent athletes rely on their coaches to give them all the information. And this is why I've always had a little bit of beef with like the video game analogy, right? I don't want to be sitting in the corner or cornering somebody and say, 1-1-2, immediately they throw a 1-1-2. That's not the response I'm looking for. I want to give a little strategic input, then I want my athlete to go figure it out, right? Like 1-1-2 is there. Okay. Maybe 15, 20 seconds go by and they see the opportunity for the 1-1-2 and they figure it out. Right. But no, diving into kind of my approach or a way that I layer in practice with a more concurrent based model, which I think is applicable for a lot of different contexts. Athletes that are of a lower training age, I think being one, or athletes with super variable demands, right? Like my pro team and my mixed martial arts team, we have a very set schedule that I think works really well, but we also have a lot of sporadic demands. We have one pro team that's practicing whether or not they have a fight or don't have a fight. We have professional boxers mixing into the MMA with some collegiate level wrestlers, world level wrestlers, some, ranked UFC fighters, best in the world. And so that's a dichotomous variable type of bunch, right? And so in that, I think we can hit all our demands and all our needs a little bit better with a concurrent based model. One thing I look at with my concurrent based model is I'm not strictly concurrent. I'm not married to the approach as far as this is our theme of every day and I'm following that specific script every single day. That's not how I approach it. With our concurrent model, I can still bias my days towards a little bit heavier of a, and the way I look at it is like a neural load, a little bit heavier neural load, a little bit lighter neural load. So the lighter neural load will be synonymous with Austin's technical days, right? The technical days where we're doing the repetitive effort and we're not really jacking our heart rate or getting into a lot of power, that's a technical day, or that's a low neural load. The days that we get competition, that's a high neural load. You're jacked up, your heart rate's through the roof, your nervous system is on fire trying to figure out how do I not get killed, essentially, right? And so the way I look at it is how do we layer this neural load throughout the week to get the best training and adaptation and response, while still utilizing, hitting every single one of our technical, tactical, and competitive check boxes every day. So the way that we do it with our pro team is Monday and Tuesday are both more or less moderately loaded days. Okay. Monday is more of a striking oriented day. Tuesday is more of a wrestling oriented day. And so since we have those two focuses, we're going to go through our basic warm up. We're going to get ready to go. I like to start off the day with a little bit more, and this is kind of like a pseudo tactical drill. I'm not giving them a whole bunch of constraints, but I'm helping them engage into practice, figure it out. Or like a simple one that I utilize quite often is like, here's was the theme of practice last week. Go play spar and find where you can fit it in, right? Or here's a constraint that's going to get you engaging with the material that we're presenting in practice, but it also gives you a little bit of a stimulus to jack you up, to get you going, right? I don't love starting off practice slow with a bunch of technique. I think that's overplayed. So I start with a little bit of the tactical emphasis. Then I do something a little different where I get right into my competitive phase, right? This tactical stimulus is something that's going to get my heart rate going, give me constraints, get me actively engaged in the process. And then I can get into my competitive phase, okay, where I'm, either, okay, here's our 30-second go, start in the over-under, win the position, right? I'm careful in this competitive phase not to completely fuck them up and wear them out, right? I'm not going to try and end practice in 35, 45 minutes. This competitive phase gets me thinking about winning, gets me actively engaged in using the techniques that we've been more or less practicing. Then I like to go into my technical approach. Okay. The technical approach for me rounds out practice. It gets my athletes performing when they're tired, and it gets my athletes to have a little bit of that, like that get up and go out of their system, so that we can really nail down and hunker down, think about positions, think about where does this apply, and give them that repetitive approach, which again, with their energy systems being zapped, this is our lowest physical demand, should be readily available at the end of practice, right? And so with that, then we go into techniques of the day, whether it's a vocabulary based day where it's like, here, I'm giving you these processes, or, hey, I'm giving you this flow. Make sure you get weight in the hands, right? I'm giving my different constraints led approach, but it's with X, Y, or Z technique, And so that's how we end practice, is a little bit more on the technical, a little bit more on the drilling type of flow, which I know is a little bit daunting for the athletes, right? After you wrestle live, you're not super excited to go back and drill again. But again, I think it allows my athletes to have a little bit better approach rather than just doing sprints at the end of practice, which we know doesn't serve anybody's right.
Yeah, doesn't help.
So Monday, Tuesday are layered like that, kind of our moderate intensity days. Wednesday is a little bit more of our competitive day, right? We have our live jiu-jitsu rolls. We get into go win in this scrambly type of situation, go win in the grappling aspect of MMA, right? And so that's about a half hour of technique, warm up, constraints-led approach, and then we get into, almost an hour of just live rolls. And so go figure it out, which again gets really long, but is our red day for a reason. We rebound right to that with our Thursday, which is kind of our review, kind of our technical day, if you will. Not a whole lot of new information going on, but we are going to hit our what we reviewed through the weeks on Monday and Tuesday. We're going to keep everything a little bit lighter, a little bit shorter goes. Bigger groups of athletes is kind of a cheat code for you as a coach to give athletes more rest when they don't want it. Okay, you're getting in groups of 5 and 2 guys are going at a time, right? That's going to give you a lot more rest break than your athletes are kind of aware of. And they don't feel like they're just standing around because they're coaching, they're involved with their athletes. So Thursday's our light day, and then Friday's our another competition sparring day, right? And that's as close to, MMA competition simulation as you can get. Walkout songs in the cage, lock the door, the whole round, dinger going off. And that's exactly how we approach it. So that's a little bit more of a 5-day training week, but Monday, Tuesday are moderate stressor days. Wednesday's a high, Thursday's a low, Friday's back to a high.
I love it. That's how do you apply that? Like, say somebody does have a fight coming up, right?
Sure.
How do you apply that when they're 2 weeks out?
When I'm 2 weeks out, we cut some of the moderate approach on Monday, Tuesday. We cut some of the competition out of those 2 days. We're tapering off a little bit. So we get a little more tactical there. They get a little more private attention off to the side. Then when we get into Wednesday, they're still on their competitive day. Thursday's rolling. And then depending on 2 weeks out, they have, I believe it's 1 round in the cage. So that's like 1 heavy competition day, right? And then we're fight week, so 2 weeks out, we have 1 competitive round the cage, and then fight week, it's all tech spar, right? It's all super light and cut back. So we cut back a little bit. By that time, when we're getting close to competition, we're tapering off. So we can cut back on some of the competitive emphases and get really tactical with it.
For the people at home that don't know what like taper mean, what's a good taper to you? What does taper mean?
Taper to me is a reduction in volume and not necessarily intensity, or a full taper. If I say full taper, what I mean there is a reduction in volume and intensity, right? So throughout these days, we're talking technical, tactical, high central nervous system load, low central nervous system load. When I taper, I'm looking to downregulate, get low on my central nervous system load, and get lower on my competitive load. Okay. And so that decreases my intensity. I'm doing less hard shit, essentially. And I'm doing less of it, download or tapering off on my volume. So instead of, if in the week that I laid out, we kind of have 2 days of moderate competition and then 2 days of really high level competition. I'm cutting out the 2 days of moderate competition. I'm cutting most of that out volume wise, right? I'm keeping some of the intensity on our Wednesday and Friday with our high competitive load, because I still think you need intensity in a taper, but I'm taking out volume so that 1, my athlete starts to feel better. They're not getting run down into the ground. And then 2, we're still sharp, right? I need to have that kind of killer instinct. I need to have this idea of, okay, I'm about to compete. I'm going to see more specific type of stimulus to competition, if you will.
Right. And that's where, so to me, that's where MMA and like more of the striking side differs than wrestling, right? Yeah. When I would taper, say in the system I did, we did 6 weeks out, right? The system I would do for 2 weeks out would be different. But the difference being, I would take out all of the tactical sessions, and I would only have competition and technical.
Okay.
And the reason being is because wrestling it's extremely intense, right? Mm-hmm. But we can get 3 live goes and split up. So 3 live goes on. So really my schedule would be Monday would be technical, Tuesday would be competition, Wednesday, Thursday, technical, Friday, competition. And we would just do 3 live goes on Tuesday, 3 live goes on Friday, right? 3 full matches, right? I'm still getting 36 minutes of high intensity wrestling in. Right. And even unless they go to overtime, right? So up to 45 minutes of high intensity wrestling, which is the exact same amount of volume when it comes to the competition phase.
Yeah.
But my grinder practices in wrestling are drastically lower. The volume has substantially dropped, and those are the ones that make you feel worn down. Those yellow days, the repetitive yellow days, those are the ones that make your body feel like shit.
Right. And so I think we are saying a little bit of the same thing, right? We're taking out like the mud, right? We're taking out the shit that's going to make you sore and really tired, which Austin's talking about his tactical days and his yellow days being that. Remember, my Monday and Tuesday are yellow days. Those are our kind of moderate intensity days, which I'm cutting short so that we're not, again, getting tired, getting sore. And I think that's really important. The other thing I want to highlight that is really important to understand, especially with MMA, even in strength and conditioning too, that's a little bit less of a factor or less of a thought when we're coaching just a sport like wrestling or just a sport like jiu-jitsu or just striking, right? Is with our mixed modal approach in MMA, each different type of practice correlates with different energy systems, right? We have some synonyms there. Striking is a little bit more of our aerobic alactic type of system, right? Jiu-jitsu gets a lot more into aerobic, not because of the intensity of the rolls, but because of the quantity and the duration of the rolls. Wrestling is almost always lactic, right? And so as we look at that, like if I'm looking at a wrestling practice, I can almost always guarantee you that wrestling practice is going to come on a yellow or red day. There's very little wrestling that goes on in the green, right? If I'm doing a mitts session, that can be striking, that can be full tilt. That could also always be a green day. It could turn into a red day, sure, whatever, but that's more biased towards a green day, doing mitts and striking, right? And so as we start to mix those things in and we're creating a strength and conditioning synonymous with a practice plan, we start to learn what variables or what practices go with which stimuli, right? So our lactic conditioning in the weight room is almost synonymous with our wrestling goes in the practice room, which is also layered really well with like our pure strength work, right? Where we get into our technical approach, it pairs really well with some aerobic volume type of work in the weight room, pairs really well with some aerobic volume work in our conditioning arena, right?
Right. Like you could throw your aerobic capacity work in, or your long, slow, your LSD runs that Alex always talks about, because you got to fucking take LSD in order for you to
To
actually do
tolerate
them,
them.
because they're so fucking boring.
Right.
Like you could throw those in. Like a really good thing if you want to keep a green day on a technical day is you just have them go on a buddy run after, and you say, "Look, listen, bitch, you're not going fast. We're going 60 minutes, and I want you to barely break a sweat in that 60 minutes.
Yeah.
I want it to be a 3 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10." And
Which
as
is
long as the athlete understands that, then you can keep it at that green zone, because the
mhm.
hardest part about that is for the athlete to understand the purpose.
Yeah, that's the really hard part for you get athletes to kind of rein it in. And then to finish the analogy, right? Our alactic, our competition days, which were red on all firing cylinders, are synonymous with a lot of our alactic bursts, are synonymous with a lot of our power work or our specific work in the weight room, right? And so you learn to layer those things in together, and then based on different points in the calendar year, which I think is kind of our next step, right? Our mesocycles, our month long cycles, our seasons, if you will. Like, how do we break those down, and when is it appropriate to approach a little more, like we were talking about, Austin, technically, tactically, or competitively, or emphasize all three of those based on when we are away from competition?
Well, it comes down to, for me, so we've talked about general physical preparedness, or GPP phase.
Yeah.
We talked about specific physical preparedness, or SPP, and then we also have our literally just sport specific phase, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be like the 2 weeks close to the fight, right?
There's also
Um,
technically a transitionary phase in there, but
yeah, whatever. But
brush up on your super training and your
shut the fuck
Bekashinsky.
up. I'm trying to keep it as broad as possible. And
Come
everybody
on
listens.
now.
This is a strength coach nerd like us.
Come on now.
So, anyways, so we go from our GPP to our SPP to our sports specific phase. And as we go through those different things, there's different times in the year, right? So if you have an athlete, and I'll stick on the wrestling analogy because that's what I've been on all night. Say we have a team, and it's 4 weeks, like right about now for the D2 through NAIA crew. So about 3 weeks after nationals. This is when we would start our general physical preparedness phase, right? This is where we can do a lot of different, like in the strength room, we can do a lot of absolute strength. We can try to make gains. We're going to try to make you Mario. So we're going to find what is our team deficient at, and we're going to try to make them better at that. So that's going to be a main focus. It also allows us to try to stack our stimuli on top, because we know that as they go, they can start to build our thresholds up. To me personally, a lot of GPP is just building thresholds, whether that's on the technical side, whether that's on the tactical side, or whether that's on the competition side. And typically a threshold has to do with volume, where we
Yep.
can layer in our volume as we go. So we can have longer practices because we know we're not competing. This is where we can do, instead of the 2 techniques that I talked about earlier, because we were 6 weeks out, we can do our 5 technique practices and make that technical session an hour and a half and go over as many things as we can while still keeping an attentional focus as we go.
I think it's really important to correlate the two things that you just said when you're talking about identifying kind of where we can make you Mario and then increasing your thresholds. Like I know a lot of coaches are, I think like GPP and then work capacity is like synonymous, which they are, but you're not exclusively doing the aerobic or the LSD type of stuff, right? I know
Right.
a lot of coaches think, okay, we're in the off season. We're going to start with the low intensity and get them a huge gas tank so then we can start throttling them. It's like, no, GPP is general physical. I want you to be ready to do everything. So I'm building capacity in every capacity, not just the low intensity, long duration capacity.
Exactly. Like you can build alactic capacity. You can
Yeah.
build lactic capacity. Like you can build these thresholds in any strength or conditioning variable. You could also build it in the technique side, right? Where you're trying to give them a bigger playbook. Like this is where we can teach a lot of different techniques because they don't have to implement them anytime soon. I can teach somebody a 10 series body lock technique where they don't have to implement this until next October. And this is, what is it? It's fucking April, right? They can go over and over and over again and get those reps like we talked about, not just fucking talk about them, you jiu-jitsu people. Actually get the fucking reps in and do that technique over and over and over again to where they really hammer home the technique so that when it comes time in season or into our next phase, which is going to be our SPP, the beginning of season, that's where we can get into actually applying those techniques in our tactical phase as well.
Yeah, and before we move on to SPP, I want to kind of talk about GPP from like an MMA lens, right? When we're coming off a fight, like we're recovering from our injuries, absolutely. This is time to kind of address our weaknesses, right? If we're in a physical deficit of like strength, or like I'm not the most powerful guy, or I am powerful but I don't really have the gas tank. This is where we address those weaknesses when we're far away from the next fight, right? This is a good time to build those things up and kind of take a risk, if you will. So physically, we're building up the weaknesses in MMA, but then also it gives you a chance to play with your style and play with different martial arts that you're maybe not as proficient at, right? Like if I'm a striker and that's how I identify and that's where I make really all my wins and gains, your GPP or your far off camp is a great time to fall in love with jiu-jitsu, fall in love with wrestling and get those reps in, right? Because starting a new or a different martial art than the one you're traditionally comfortable with is going to be a stressing thing in itself, right? And so you're going to build some threshold and capacity there, and we're not wasting that energy when we're closer to a fight or closer to camp, and we really need to kind of focus it in or narrow it down.
Right. And if you're a one sport athlete, if you're not an MMA, the GPP is a really good time to cross train.
Yeah.
We know that boxing helps wrestling. We know wrestling helps boxing. We know that kickboxing helps taekwondo and vice versa. We know jujitsu helps wrestling. All of these, this is where if we're in our GPP phase, we can learn different ways. You don't have to go play fucking baseball, right? The cool thing about combat sports is you can cross train on the mat still. There's different ways to use the mat, right? So this is where you can increase your movement literacy, you can increase your movement library and learn different skills that you might not even know how they apply to your main sport yet. But as long as you're learning them and you're putting the time in, they will pay off later down the road because you're learning concepts, not moves.
Yep, 100%.
So moving from GPP to the SPP phase, right? And this is going to be essentially, if we're in April talking about that right now, I think SPP probably starts in late August, early September, and then rolls through the beginning of the season if we're talking a college wrestling season, right? So I still consider the first really about month of the season as just the SPP because nobody gives a fuck about those results.
Absolutely.
And that's where we can start to narrow in on, hey, this is where we're adding our tactical practices way back in. This is where we're trying to apply all those techniques that we were learning or all these different things. And we're trying to figure out how they mesh into not just wrestling in and of itself, but how do they mesh into my style? And from the sport coaching side, I think the SPP phase might be the most important.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that's where the athlete finds out who they are. They find out how they can apply everything in their lens, not necessarily in the sport, but how do I hit my low single versus how do you hit your low single? And how does it apply to the competition that I'm going against in the practice room?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think your GPP is you're spending time focused on learning the sport or learning or learning like physical literacy, right? You're focused on being a better athlete in general. Your SPP phase is when you focus on your game. I'm rounding out what I do really well. What's my best go-to move set and skill set, right? And so I think that SPP phase can get really important for that reason. I guess one thing I would give a context to is like, if I'm a high school coach or I coach a high school team, I don't start this until after Christmas, which is pretty wild to say. But if I'm starting practice in November with my kids, right? If I haven't seen them, I haven't really done a fall wrestling or they've been playing football more or less, I need time from November to Christmas to give them that GPP, the technical capacity to get back to wrestling, right? And to Austin's credit, exactly what we said. I don't give a fuck about winning a tournament in early November,
100%.
right? So I take this
Loser.
SPP,
unless except for Super 32s. Super 32s matters.
That's cool. I take that. I don't have any kids wrestling Super 32s. I take this SPP approach. I take that from end of December till early January, and then we get into our competition phase when it's championship season. But I think, like Austin said, this becomes a really important time in your SPP to round out your own skill set, figure out how all these various techniques and physical prowesses or skills that you're gathering, how do they work into creating your own coherent game?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's cool because in theory, what we keep saying over and over again is GPP is just the technical. SPP is just the tactical.
Yep.
And competition is just our sport specific phase, right? It is the exact same thing with different words for different parts of the sport, right?
Yeah.
But it's all the exact same concept where we have a lower intensity, really, I guess, higher workload for the GPP, but you're learning new things. Essentially, you're trying to even out your deficiencies. Then you're trying to figure out how these deficiencies apply into your system. That's the SPP phase. And how do you apply these new skills you just made? And then in the actual sport specific phase, which is I would say the last month of competition. So the last 4 weeks leading up to the finals. Or if you talk about D1 wrestling, it's probably really the last month and a half to 2 months, because you need to start peaking at the right time. You need to start getting the results so you get seeded for the big tournaments.
Well, and I would say it's 4 or 5 weeks out from a fight too, right? So
yeah, for sure. But in like college wrestling, I would bring your sport specific phase out to at the most 8 weeks, because you need to start peaking. You need to start getting the results so that you can get seeded. And you have your conference tournaments, all these different things. Mm-hmm. But either way, that is where I don't fucking care about making you Mario anymore. All right. If we're not going to learn it, we're not going to learn it. Mm-mm. So we need to turn you into whatever version is going to turn you into the best thing. Are you Donkey Kong? Are you a power fucking wrestler? All right. Let's go Donkey Kong smash some bitches.
Yeah.
Are you Yoshi? Are you fast as fuck? Okay, then we're going to teach you, we're going to highlight those strengths and teach you how to use those strengths even better. I don't care about what you've learned up until this point. Yeah. We figure out what are you the best at and how do we make you better at it? Because in crunch time, if there's 10 seconds on the line and you got to fucking score, you're going to go to what you're best at, not what you're worst at.
Yeah, it's essentially how do you win? Figuring out how to win, right? We've got our tool set. We're fucking suited up. If we're Batman, I have my tool belt. I'm out in the field. I can't go engineer some shit back in my bat lab. I got my shit. I got what I can.
Fuck is a bat lab?
Fuck you. Figure out how to win. Bat cave. My bad. Figure out how to win. Okay. Right. And so I think that rounds out that really well. But you highlighted a really good point. And I almost look at this like I'm going to kind of mix metaphors, but this is like an energy system type of thing. All of these things are working all of the time, but when we choose to emphasize and really practically apply them matters, right? Because in our GPP phase, we're still going to do some competition. We're still going to do some SPP, right? It's not like it's all kind of all or none, right? Then in our SPP phase, we still need some technical approach. We still need some GPP-esque type of movement, right? In our competition phase, we still need some SPP stuff, right? We still need a little bit of that contextualized constraint-led game. It's just we're super biasing this stuff to what's the immediate need. And that goes down into even in an individual practice when we're doing a concurrent. We're going to do a training week. All these things still apply. And that's what I hope we kind of conveyed is these things are just apply, whether you're talking about one individual practice, an individual week, a month, a year, a quadrennial cycle, whatever you're on, all these things apply at different scale there.
We should definitely turn this into like a practice planning book. We should listen back to this because this is pretty fucking knowledgeable shit.
No,
if I toot my own horn.
It's a system, right? And what we say is like good systems win. And I think it's a good system, right?
100%.
It's critically thinking about how to layer things in, and then you can get as fancy or as simple as you want with it.
Yeah, 100%. But if you have the basics, right, it all comes back to literally step one we talked about, which was the micro of microcycles. How do you create a drill for your sport? If you don't know if you can't break down what the main variables are that go into a technique, then you're lost in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. It takes work and it takes time, right? You should be able to break down a double leg to this is far, but this is the last thing we'll talk about, right? When I talk about a shot in wrestling, there's 4 main points. There's going to be the setup, there's going to be the contact point, there's going to be the finishing point, and there's going to be the position of ending, or where do you end up after you finished that takedown, so to say, right? Those 4 points. If you can't break down exactly what's going on in what you would consider a successful takedown of all 4 of those points in the key variables, all the way through the entire wrestling movement library, then what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like all it does is take work and it takes time. But if you put the work in and if you take the time to write out those diagrams, I guarantee that you can make great drills. And if you make great drills, I guarantee you can make great practices. If you can make great practices, I guarantee that you can make a great season. And if you can make a great season, I guarantee that you can make an extremely proficient and a fantastic culture at your school and a winning team. And if you can win over and over and over again, then you know your system works. And it all starts with doing the work on the front end so that you can get the results on the back end. Boom.
Done.
Let's go.
Period.
All right, y'all. So if you guys got to get in touch with us, if you think we're idiots, if you want to talk to us about your system, you think we're wrong, we'd love to talk. So please hit us up in the show notes. That's going to be our Instagrams. It's going to be our emails. All that's available there. If you're looking for strength and conditioning programs, if you want to know what pairs well with where you're at in your team season, we do team programs that are custom for high school teams, college teams, club teams. We actually program for actual fight teams as well, or fight gyms. So we can make you a white label fitness program to where you can actually make money off the strength and conditioning program we program for you, which we think is a pretty cool option. So that's available at buildingafighter.com. And we also have those individual programs where they're presets. We have membership options, and we also have our custom programs built for you, designed by us. So if you want any of those, buildingafighter.com. This is Dr. Austin Shane.
Alex Reben.
And we are out.